King Herod is one of the most notorious characters in the Bible. He is the man who tries to kill the infant Jesus. Kill them all.
He orders this appalling act where all the male children are slaughtered.
But in history, Herod is a powerful and successful ruler.
History should remember Herod the Great as a ruthless but very effective king of Judea.
Who is the real King Herod? The great ruler from history or the monster from the Bible? And could this really be his tomb? In 2007, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Archaeologists cause a sensation when they reveal the discovery of a sarcophagus.
With a breaking story from 2,000 years ago.
Fragments of what could be the most important archaeological find in the Middle East.
What may be the tomb of an ancient king, Herod.
8 feet long and made of a rare pink limestone, this sarcophagus is beautifully carved and polished so meticulously it resembled marble.
Well, finding any king's tomb is big, but finding the tomb of King Herod the Great, the most famous ruler of Judea, is winning the sweepstakes or the lottery right there.
The discovery of Herod's tomb is immensely exciting because it's a connection to a man who was not only a legend of the Bible, but was also a real and a really important figure in ancient history.
Historical texts tell us Herod is one of the great kings of the ancient world. From 37 BC, he rules Judea for 33 years.
He was the most magnificent, the wealthiest, the most powerful, the most generous Jewish king that he could be.
Here you have someone who was at the height of his powers, was a great builder and a great planner.
He was a brilliant political leader in all sorts of ways, and in many respects he was a very successful king of the Jews.
But in the New Testament, he is the king who orders the murder of the infant Jesus.
People do not think of Herod as great. Herod was a sociopath. Herod comes across as the enemy of the purpose of God in human history.
It's hard to see anything other than the psychopath who slaughtered the innocent.
So just who was Herod the Great? And is this his sarcophagus?
When we first meet Herod on the pages of the New Testament, he's towards the end of his career. He is someone who is full of personal problems, personal difficulties, and who's clinging onto power by his fingernails.
According to the Gospel of Matthew, men described as magi traveled to Jerusalem to seek an audience with King Herod.
They were star gazers. Their job was to consult the stars and their movements and see what correlations or revelations they would give you about coming or present events.
The Bible doesn't tell us very much about the Magi at all. It doesn't even tell us that there are 3 of them, much less where they came from. What we are told is that they came following a star, which suggests that they're astrologers.
Matthew's Gospel tells us that the men were searching for a child, born King of the Jews.
The story of the Magi has the hallmarks of a legend. It's more about the identity of Jesus, of saying that this is someone who's very special. That's really what the story is telling us, rather than explaining history about these particular figures.
According to Matthew, the men had come to King Herod to ask for guidance.
Kings would not turn down audiences with people like the wise men, especially if they seemed to have insider trader information that was plausible about the future. So the scene between Herod and the wise men in the Gospel of Matthew is absolutely plausible. This sort of thing happened all the time.
I think an audience with Herod the Great would have been really terrifying if you were not sure of what Herod thought about you, or even worse, if you knew that Herod didn't like you. It probably was one of the more terrifying experiences of your life.
I hear you have a question for me.
So the Magi come to Herod and say, "Where's the King of the Jews to be born?" Which is an especially dumb thing to ask a king, because it's basically like saying, "Where's your successor?" or "Where's the real king?"
King of the Jews. I am King of the Jews.
Bethlehem, the Church of the Nativity. This is the traditional site of Jesus' birth.
The Church of the Nativity is important because it's at this site that Christians believe Jesus was born and that God became flesh. This is the place where God broke into the world to change history. Not only is this one of the holiest sites in Christianity, it's one of the holiest sites of all religions in the world. Underneath this altar here is a cave, a grotto, and it's in this grotto that Christians believe Jesus was born, and the place is commemorated by a 14-point silver star. Tens of millions of pilgrims come to the Church of the Nativity every year to venerate the birth of Jesus.
According to the Gospel of Luke, Joseph and the pregnant Mary traveled to Bethlehem from their home in Nazareth.
They had to travel to Bethlehem because, according to Luke, there was a census that required people to go to their ancestral homes. Joseph was apparently from Bethlehem, so he had to return there.
The importance of Jesus' being born in Bethlehem is to connect him to King David. Bethlehem was the city of David. Joseph was of the line of David, and so it links him to that great history of the Jewish patriarchs and Jewish history.
Moreover, there's a prophecy in Micah that talks about the future ruler coming from Bethlehem. So Jesus has to be born in Bethlehem to fulfill the prophecy from the Old Testament and to be the true Davidic Messiah.
According to the traditional nativity story, when Mary and Joseph arrive in Bethlehem, there is no place for them at the inn.
Mary.
But let's be clear what the biblical narrative actually says. The word for inn isn't there. This is not some public guest house that they're staying in. They are probably in Joseph's extended family's house. There's not room for them in the main accommodation, so they have to put Jesus where the animals are.
Nebi Samuel, 9 miles from Bethlehem. The houses in this archaeological site provide an insight into the Nativity story.
This is a typical home dating to the Second Temple period. This is the kind of home you can imagine Jesus might have been born in Bethlehem. The family would have lived up here. They may have accessed the top floor from a ladder, maybe 2 or 3 rooms, everything very crowded. But what's really significant is what we find down here on the ground floor. This is actually quite typical of a first-century home. The animals would have been kept inside the home on the ground floor. Here, they would have eaten food that would have been placed in here. They would have drunk some water. It's in a trough like this that we can imagine the manger in which Jesus was laid. Here, amongst the animals.
When we think of the Nativity, it has all the elements of beauty and wonder, of miracle, of romance.
It's important to remember that this is a very real story with very real people. God enters the world in the most vulnerable state possible, a little infant, and depends on the care of humanity to help him spread his message.
King of the Jews. I am King of the Jews.
The birth of a new king, basically a royal pretender, a threat to the throne, is a threat to Herod, and Herod is concerned.
When Herod hears that the Magi are looking for the child-born king of the Jews, his thought is, I'm the king of the Jews. Herod is the king of the Jews. So who could this child be, this usurper?
Please, don't leave. I need to consult my priests. Find it! Find it!
According to Matthew, Herod orders his priests to find where prophecies say the Messiah will be born.
Herod is definitely jealous and threatened by Jesus, and there's a big irony here. The king who has huge power is jealous of a little tiny baby.
There were very real threats against Herod's life. It's not so surprising that you would constantly believe your life was in danger.
Bethlehem.
Herod is certainly trying to play his cards close to his vest. He's trying to be both clever and cunning and not reveal too much about how he really feels about the idea of a new messianic ruler figure.
Go to Bethlehem and search for the child. And when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage.
He says that he wants to honor Jesus, to go and also pay his respect, but he wants to kill the child.
In the Bible, King Herod is painted as the epitome of evil.
Kill them all.
We tend to remember Herod as the Herod of the nativity scene, as the evil Herod from the New Testament. We know it from Christmas plays in schools, we know it from how it's retold in church. So the Herod that we know is very much the product of the Christian story and the Christian imagination, rather than the totality of who he was.
But to understand the man behind the legend, we need to look at the writings of Jewish historian Josephus.
Josephus is a priest of supposedly Hasmonean stock. He also writes several histories, both of the Jewish people, but also of the Great Jewish War. Within those histories of the Jewish people, Herod receives prominent attention.
Josephus fills in all sorts of fascinating details about Herod and tells us the details of his family, of his political successes, his political disasters, and so on.
Josephus describes in detail Herod's journey from courtier to king.
Herod first comes to our attention as a young courtier in his father's administration, and Herod originally is appointed a local governor in Galilee.
But in 40 BC, there is an uprising in Jerusalem.
After the Parthians have taken over Jerusalem, Herod gathers his mother and his mother-in-law and his wife and flees the city.
In the Judean desert, Herod is attacked.
So Josephus records Herod turns and faces the enemy. Herod wins, in Josephus's narration, a dramatic victory over his opponents.
It was a really important victory that really set him on the path to becoming king of Judea.
This victory is the turning point in his fortunes, and from there, everything is on the up and up.
Rome sees the potential in this Herod to create a really successful puppet king. Somebody that they could rely on the ground, who understands the traditions on the ground, but whom they could actually pull the strings on if necessary.
The Romans put Herod into power. The Romans supports Herod. The Romans are the ones who granted Herod legitimacy and client kingship.
My greetings.
Herod is actually a very successful ruler. A great segment of the population really support Herod, really like him.
He wanted to be like Alexander the Great, or the great kings of the past. So he had this vast building program set up to demonstrate his power and authority.
Herod builds vast theaters, aqueducts, and mountain forts. And in 23 BC, Herod begins expanding the Second Temple.
Herod tries to ingratiate himself with the Jewish people by enlarging and renovating the Jewish temple, and he does succeed in making it into one of the most beautiful buildings in the ancient world.
Today, Herod's temple is gone, but part of the colossal platform on which it once stood remains. The Western Wall is still one of the holiest sites in Judaism.
One cannot overestimate the importance of the temple in first century Judaism. It was the religious center of Judaism, the place where God's presence was understood to reside on earth.
Despite Herod's achievements and Rome's support, early in his reign, Herod's crown is not secure.
One of the big problems that Herod has got is that he wants to call himself the king of the Jews, but he himself is not Jewish by blood. Herod has got to solve this problem. He solves this problem by a kind of brilliant move by marrying into the most famous Jewish family of the time, the Hasmonean dynasty.
Herod marries the beautiful princess Mariamne. Her family had ruled Judea for a century before Herod took the throne.
For Herod, marrying the Hasmonean princess gives him the opportunity to claim that he is Hasmonean himself, especially because the previous king has no sons. So he becomes, simply through marriage, the obvious and oldest and clearest Hasmonean that there is.
But according to Josephus, Herod's choice of bride isn't purely political.
I think the only way to describe the relationship between Herod and Mariamne is one of obsession. And he's obviously completely besotted.
Together, the couple have 5 children.
It seems like it's a match made in heaven.
But Josephus tells us all is not as it appears.
He seems incredibly and almost jealously infatuated with her. And Josephus records that she thinks very little of him and thinks that he is of very low status.
So little by little, the relationship, the marriage between Herod and Mariamne starts to unravel. And it's almost Shakespearean, right, in its quality of tragedy.
Josephus records that when Herod goes out of the kingdom, he is very concerned about his wife Mariamne's fidelity to him.
Herod is passionately in love with his wife, Mariamne, but his mother and sister absolutely hate this woman. So they seize their opportunity and they say that she's been unfaithful to him whilst he's been away. Herod flies into a jealous rage and has her executed.
Almost immediately afterward, Herod regrets the decision, and it's not just simple regret, it's a real deep depression. Josephus records that Herod actually almost kills himself from grief.
He's increasing his jealousy, his paranoia, and increasingly becoming that monster, the Herod of legend.
So by the time Matthew's gospel describes Herod meeting the Magi after the birth of Jesus, he is no longer an even-handed ruler. Now, according to the New Testament, Herod unleashes a massacre. His target, the infant Jesus.
It seems that from his birth to his death, Jesus was always in danger of being assassinated at the hands of evil men.
Go to Bethlehem and search for the child.
According to the Gospel of Matthew, the jealous and paranoid King Herod sends the Magi to find the newborn Messiah.
He tries to get the Magi to tell him where he is so that he might kill him because he's threatened by the birth of Jesus.
The Magi reach Bethlehem sometime after Jesus' birth.
A boy.
The Magi were probably overwhelmed when they first set eyes on Jesus. They were probably also wondering, who is this child going to be? What is he going to do? What does the future hold for Jesus?
The fact that the Magi brought gifts fit for a king, gold, frankincense, myrrh. Frankincense used in royal palaces, myrrh used for royal burials. Who wants gold? Kings want gold, right?
The Magi have something of a dilemma. Do they return to Herod and report to him and thereby endanger the life of the child? Or do they leave and thereby incur the wrath of Herod, who might pursue them?
They intuit that Herod's intentions are not good, and so they ignore the king, and they go a different route out of a sense of protecting this child in whom they have seen God.
I have news about the Magi. They have chosen not to return to Jerusalem.
Herod's reaction is unsurprising. He's already paranoid. Now he's thinking, oh, they slunk off back to wherever they came from because they found something they didn't want to report to me. And so I think this only causes him to push the panic button.
Kill every male child under the age of 2.
According to the Gospel of Matthew, Herod sends his soldiers to Bethlehem to find and kill Jesus.
Kill them all.
Herod, as a king, would have been perfectly willing to kill any and every person that he needed to achieve his goal.
Find him!
It's very hard to recapture the horror of the massacre of the innocents. Dozens, if not scores, of children being murdered in their homes. It must have been terrifying.
Stay down! Don't move! Stay down!
How do you hide your child from an evil king like Herod, who's bent on destroying these children out of a lust for power?
Anything but in order. Next house! Wait.
According to the story in Matthew, Joseph is warned in a dream that Herod is a threat to their newborn child, and they get out of town fast.
They wanted to make sure that they were nowhere near Herod's homicidal grasp.
Herod probably thought that he had killed all the children in Bethlehem, but he never knew that Jesus had escaped.
Matthew says that to escape the massacre, Mary and Joseph flee to Egypt.
Like any couple with a child, Mary and Joseph would have been overjoyed to know that their son was still safe. They are human beings, we have to remember, and they had the same human emotions that any parents would have.
Mary and Joseph, as they reached Egypt with that precious child, must have felt tremendous relief. But they also must have wondered, what now? In a foreign land, what do you do? How do you live?
But some scholars question if the massacre of the innocents is a real historical event.
Kill them all.
Josephus does not talk about this kind of massacre, and you would think, given all of the other massacres he talks about, that he would bring it up.
It does tell us something about the way that Herod's character was understood by lots of ancients. It's the kind of story they told about Herod as a paranoid, neurotic king who was capable of acts of great barbarism.
The massacre of the innocents is not historical, but what it does do for Matthew is it makes Jesus look like a new Moses. In the Old Testament, Pharaoh tries to kill baby Moses by slaughtering all of the Hebrew children. Matthew, by showing Herod slaughtering all of these children in Bethlehem, is showing that Jesus is like Moses and Herod is like the Pharaoh.
So who is the true King Herod? And can history and archaeology reveal the man behind the myth? In the Judean desert, 10 miles from Jerusalem, stands Herodium.
From a distance, Herodium looks like a volcano. kind of like Dr. Evil's secret volcano lair, or something out of a James Bond film. It's a big cone. But in reality, Herodium is actually a 7-story palace. Two stories underground, 3 stories above ground, and then a massive tower sticking up 2 more stories above that.
This palace was built by King Herod.
Herod the Great took an impregnable fortress and then carved out a mountain just over here and took that dirt and spread it all around the palace, burying the bottom 2 stories in earth. Herod built Herodium for himself. In fact, this is the only site that Herod built that he named after himself. This is Herod the Great's mountain.
It was a site of great personal significance to him. He won this impressive victory there early in his career, and is a place that he associates with the good things in his life.
The historian Josephus had told us in his writings that Herod was buried at Herodium.
The big mystery here at Herodium is where precisely is Herod the Great buried? I mean, this is a question that has plagued scholars for the past few decades. Everybody wants to know what is the final resting place of Herod the Great. Because if we can find the tomb of Herod the Great, we can fill in one of the great missing links in Jewish history.
For 35 years, Professor Ehud Netzer of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem searches the site for Herod's tomb. But he finds no trace. Helping him search is his student, Roy Parat.
השאלה הייתה שאלת $1,000,000. באמת המיקום המדויק של הקבר לא היה ברור.
An investigation of the lower areas of the palace reveals no clues. So Professor Netzer and his team widen their search.
So as archaeologists were excavating the side of Herodium, they began to find clues that gave us hints about a possible burial site. They found evidence of a tomb. They found other evidence of other burial practices. And then they found the jackpot. A sarcophagus, an ornate, beautiful sarcophagus that could be the tomb of Herod the Great.
Breaking story from 2,000 years ago.
Fragments of what could be the most important archaeological find in the Middle East since the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
The quality of the sarcophagi, and of course the location, and the timing that it was built, all suggest that only one person could have built this monument, and that is Herod the Great.
The discovery of the sarcophagus is very exciting because it's a reminder that Herod was a real historical figure. And so to have this sarcophagus, to know where in fact he was buried, really makes history come alive.
According to Josephus, in Herod's final years, nobody is safe from his suspicion and paranoia.
When he became personally weaker and ill towards the end of his reign, he was even more paranoid and concerned and looking over his shoulder. He was very much afraid that somebody was going to usurp his throne.
Herod had plots coming from outside his palace, from inside his palace, from outside his family, from inside his family, and some were real and some were imagined. Herod becomes convinced that his sons by Mariamne are plotting against him. It's the great irony of Herod's marriage to his Hasmonean wife. Although it's really good for his legitimacy as king, it also gives his sons reason to think that maybe they should be king instead of him. Herod becomes convinced they are actually out to kill him, and in response, he executes them.
Herod tracks down 300 of their supporters and executes them too.
Josephus records the last days of Herod's life in gruesome detail. He's eaten up internally by worms, he's ravaged by sickness.
He is probably hugely obese. He is not a well man.
He goes back and forth between wanting to die and not wanting to die, trying to kill himself. For Josephus, this seems to be a fitting end to a king who is racked internally by dissent and turmoil. By the end of his life, Herod has amassed quite a death count. Herod has executed one wife, he's executed 2 sons. At the end of Herod's life, a 3rd son is added to that list.
In 4 BC, after 33 years as ruler of Judea, King Herod dies. The historian Josephus writes about his burial. The dead man was wrapped in crimson and wore a diadem, and beside his right hand lay his scepter. And they went toward Herodium, for it was there that the burial took place by his own order. And thus did Herod end his life. But how should Herod be remembered? As a great king who brought peace and stability, or a bloodthirsty and paranoid tyrant who tried to kill the infant Jesus?
The Gospel of Matthew does such a good job painting the picture of a monster that it's hard, even for modern skeptical readers, to see anything other than the psychopath who slaughtered the innocent.
I don't think the popular conception of Herod the Great based on the Gospel of Matthew is fair.
Kill them all.
It exaggerates his ruthlessness and his willingness to commit murder in order to preserve his rule.
He's an adept politician. He's a remarkable military leader. He is, as someone who ruled for over 30 years, a really very good ruler. And none of this is information you get from reading the Bible.
But is this sarcophagus really the final resting place of King Herod? When archaeologists discover it after a 35-year search among the ruins of Herodium, the limestone coffin is in hundreds of fragments.
We are looking at this complete sarcophagus now, but it was found in pieces, in hundreds of pieces. It was literally smashed. We reassembled it together in the laboratories of the Israel Museum. You can still see very vividly the places that it was hammered and smashed into pieces. You can see the strokes of the hammer if you look carefully on the pieces joined together. Somebody smashed it into pieces with a lot of emotion. It was not just to break it to see what's the treasure that is hidden inside. It's much more than that.
For some, the violence with which the sarcophagus was smashed seems to confirm it was Herod's final resting place.
In the decades after Herod died, he became identified in popular myth and legend with the Roman rulers, who were widely loathed. So the fact that somebody would go back and smash it to bits seems to indicate that maybe it was Herod the Great inside.
You wonder whether someone is actually trying to destroy his memory, because this is somebody who has worked with the Romans and was not really a true king of the Jews.
But whether or not this is actually King Herod's sarcophagus still divides opinion.
It's the logical place that he would have been buried. So I think other things being equal, it's probably the burial place of Herod.
I find it really hard to believe that this humble, poorly built mausoleum is in fact the mausoleum that Herod the Great, one of our greatest regal architects, would have built for himself.
Archaeologist Benjamin Arubis has noticed some anomalies with the mausoleum which contained the sarcophagus.
The mausoleum is too small in terms of Herod's self-image. It doesn't fit the way he saw himself among other kings of that period. So from that point of view, it's very disappointing to think that this is what he made for his eternal memorial. After he built so many projects, huge projects, in this country and in many other cities all around the Mediterranean.
Are we 100% sure that this is Herod's sarcophagus? No, we are not. It's all about circumstantial evidence, if you'd like.
The debate over whether this is really King Herod's tomb continues.
Not only does Josephus tell us he was buried here, and not only should we expect Herod to be buried at the site of his greatest military victory, but being buried here at Herodium matches the persona of Herod the Great, and that is the great king of the Jews, but at a safe distance from Jerusalem. And he's on the side of the hill. He's not going to be buried in the palace, but he's going to be buried in a great monument, looking back towards Jerusalem as a reminder, I'm the king of the Jews, even in my death.